Happy third day of Vlogmas, everyone. I will be doing my November wrap-up. I am going to be looking down a lot because I've written down my reading log right here, so I'll be referring to it. So before I get started, one thing I've been thinking about is Vlogmas isn't just busy because of all the videos I'm going to be trying to make. I've also noticed that I've been trying to watch a lot more videos than usual. A lot of the people that I follow are participating in Vlogmas, and they're putting out videos, and I want to support them in that. So I'm trying to make sure I watch people's Vlogmas videos in addition to making my own. So that was something that I really wasn't expecting, but it is kind of interesting. Okay, so the first one I read, well, first off, I read 16 books in November, which isn't my best month, but it's also not my worst. It's probably closer to the end of one of the worst months, but still not too bad, I suppose. I read more than in November than I did in October. I'll probably be doing an October wrap-up too here soon. So the first book that I read was Claudia, Wife of Pontius Pilate. This is a biblical fiction book. It was at my library, but I guess now it's a discard. They have a free rack of books that people either donate or that they get rid of from the library that people can help themselves to. And since I'd been wanting to read this one, I went ahead and took it from the shelf. It was okay. Better than the other Diana Wallace Taylor biblical fiction that I read. I like this better than The Woman at the Well. Don't really know what else to say about it. I guess we don't really have too much information about Claudius's wife. I don't think it's even a matter of historical record that she was named Claudia. I think she was mentioned like once in the Bible where she said that she believed Jesus was innocent. Okay, the next one that I read... Oh, just one second. I've actually read more books that I own this month than I do normally. There was one that I forgot that I hadn't gotten from the library. That is called Brimstone by Daniel Foster. A friend of mine picked this up for me at a local convention. The author was there, I think, selling copies. It was... I guess it was about like a werewolf. And then the main character becomes a werewolf. The part that they explain on the book, the blurb, is actually a very small part of it, and there's a lot more going on than what they mention on the blurb. It was not my favorite, for sure. I don't think I would really be all that interested in reading again, but if you're someone that likes things about werewolves or folk legends, or even just horror in historical fiction times, this might be a good one to read. Okay, the next one. This really wasn't a great month for me, to be honest. I read a lot of ones that kind of fell flat for me. So the next one that I read was The Reckoning at Gossamer Pond by Jamie Jo Wright. She is a Christian fiction author. She writes dual timeline historical fiction mystery. So there's something going on in the present and in the past, and they tie together somehow. This one I just didn't really enjoy. The main character in the present timeline I found really annoying, and just like she just didn't really seem to be connected with reality at all. She complained about things that's like, okay, like why is that a problem for you? Like, there's this whole plot line going where she runs a coffee shop, and funds from the coffee shop go to help people who are homeless and living in the town, which would be a great thing, except she's trying to get a facility set up to help them, and she's at odds with the local, with the people who work in the town, including the mayor, because they want to build like this tourist thing, like an outdoor wilderness kind of thing that people would come in, travel to take advantage of. And it's like, why is that space your only option? Why is opening up the tourist thing at a conflict with you doing your facility. Like, can't you find other property? It's like, I guess that we're going to donate the property to her, but if that's the case, like, it would make sense for them to want to sell the property. And so, she's complaining. She's like, all they care about is creating jobs and having tourists in the area. And it's like, you're really complaining about people wanting jobs? Like, I don't understand it. And then the past storyline was just way too convoluted. I never really did get the connection between the past and the present like usual. It was like, I don't know. It was confusing and it wasn't enjoyable. I almost DNF'd it. I probably would have if it was a library book. But since I owned it, I felt committed to it. And you do always want to find out what happens at the end, right? It's one of the reasons I don't really like mysteries and thrillers is because sometimes you're kept on the hook for no other reason than you want to understand the ending. And you can't just skip to the ending because then it wouldn't make any sense. So I really think that sometimes mystery and thriller writers don't do as well with the story itself. And we just keep reading it because we want to know how it ends. It just sort of feels like not giving the readers the whole experience. The next one I read was a reread called Beware Princess Elizabeth by Carolyn Meyer. This was one of my favorite books when I was in middle and high school. Still a pretty enjoyable read. Some of it's a little bit different now. I used to idolize Princess Elizabeth, but then you learn, which I guess happens with any historical figure or any celebrity or anything like that, you learn stuff that you're like, okay, the kid's book I read about them was a much more simplified version of what I had always believed. So it was interesting to go back and read this with the context that I have now. Okay, so now a couple of library books. The first one is The Rose Code. This was a pretty good book. I enjoyed it a lot. It was a historical fiction about some people who worked in a code-breaking facility in England during World War II who would receive transmissions from the Nazis that were encrypted, and they had to figure out what they were saying. They had to translate the codes. And in addition to being about their work, it was also about the people that worked, like the personal lives of them, because they couldn't really let anyone know what they were doing because it could be, I can't think of the right word, but it could be jeopardized. That's it. They could jeopardize it. They were mostly with each other and made friends with each other, had relationships with each other. And so there was a lot of good stuff there. Obviously, with any book, there's going to be some things that seem kind of weird. One of the main characters was based on Prince Philip's old girlfriend. So we got to see Prince Philip as a romantic lead, essentially. I really had to stretch my suspension of disbelief for that one, but I guess it did happen. And then there's some things like, it's something I've noticed in other historical fiction, and I don't know why. You have a character that falls in love with someone, or usually it's a woman falls in love with a man, finds out the man is married, is disappointed, but then, oh, what a coincidence, they're in an open marriage, so I can have a relationship with them. Like, how often does that really happen? And why does it seem to happen so much in historical fiction? I don't know. But overall, it was a good story and an enjoyable book. The next one was a nonfiction called The Family. This is about, basically it's a history of how fundamentalism kind of took hold in our country. We learned a lot about it. I thought it was a really good resource. There was some weird things in it again. You hear about the male gaze in fiction books a lot of the time. Somehow this also had the male gaze. Like the author really seemed to sexualize some of the female people he wrote about for no real reason. And it's like, that's a real person you're looking at and describing in this way. And a lot of the females he came in contact with apparently were hitting on him and desperate to sleep with him. At least they were giving that impression according to his book. That I really didn't like. But the rest of it was good. The next one was an audio book that I listened to in the car, How Not to Die. This was part of my goal to read more books about veganism. I'm counting this even though the author, Dr. Greger, specifically said the book wasn't about veganism. It's about following a plant-based diet and how eating more plants and less animal products will help you to live better and combat all sorts of diseases. I like that he's promoting eating less meat and less animal products. I think that's good. But I don't really like when books about a plant-based diet or veganism take the ethics out of it. Like, the ethics are important. Sometimes I feel like that's the most important part of it. Not what is it doing for yourself. It's what is it doing for the animals. You can argue... I guess you can argue both sides of it, but I feel like you're going to make a more convincing argument when you take the person outside of themselves. And not only that, I sort of question some of the research. Like, I get that it's probably, you know, that he was reporting it accurately. I don't want to say that he wasn't. But it's hard to imagine that just, this is a solution to everything. He seemed to overhype. It felt sometimes like he was overhyping the benefits of eating more plants. As much as I want people to follow that diet, even coming from a vegan standpoint, it was hard to believe that that's the solution to all the world's health problems, which was basically the argument he was making. The next one was Salt, A World History. I can't remember the author of this one. It came out in 2017, I think, so it's a fairly recent one, and the author has written a whole bunch of books about food. It was interesting, and it had some mentions of Charleston, West Virginia, which isn't too far from where I live. I didn't know West Virginia was all that involved in salt production. But it was an interesting perspective on something you probably don't think a whole lot about. So I thought that was really good. Mary Called Magdalene was another book I read. I got this from my library, and my library had it classified as inspirational fiction. I'm not sure if I would really put it in the category of like biblical or Christian fiction, because... You know, I can't speak for the author, but I didn't get the impression that the author was trying to, like, use the book to evangelize, but I could be wrong. I just didn't get that impression from reading it. This book was okay, but not exciting. I honestly almost DNF'd it a couple of times just because I wasn't that interested. Basically, it's about the life of Mary of Magdalene, a woman who was... who Jesus is said to have expelled 7 demons from her, and then she became a follower of his, and this was an attempt to look at what her life might have been, how did she become possessed by those demons, and what did her life following Jesus look like, which I think is a very interesting take. It's just, I didn't feel like enough was done to make us relate to Mary and to make us... She really did seem like a secondary character in her own story. And I didn't really like that. And like I said, it just wasn't that exciting. I don't know why I didn't DNF it. I guess I just don't like to. And it was a pretty thick book, so like I wanted the satisfaction of finishing it. But it wasn't a bad book. I just didn't get into it. The next book I read was technically another reread, Candide. I read this one back in college. This is such a ridiculous book. I think it's satire. Sometimes it seems to satirize itself. But mostly just philosophy. Pretty fun book. And like, it was a short, easy read, and it's a classic, so... on lists where it's like, have you read these important books? That's one that in an afternoon or so you can cross off the list. I did enjoy the ending. That last line was really, really funny to me. And I remember not liking it in college, and I didn't really feel any differently on the reread. The next book I read, this isn't the full title. I have it in my book as Masada, but basically it's a nonfiction about the dig at Masada, where during sorry, I don't want to get any of the facts wrong. Basically, after the temple at Jerusalem was destroyed around the time of 70 CE, I think it was, some of the survivors hid out in Herod's old fortress, and they survived there for a really long time. If you have ever read The Dove Keepers, that's what this is about. And anyways, in the 60s or the 70s, 1960s or 70s, there was a dig there where they excavated it. And this was a documentation of everything that they discovered and learned and the conclusions that they drew from it. It was really, really good. It included a lot of pictures, which I found very helpful in helping you picture this real place, even if it's what it looks like now, as opposed to when people were living there. The next book I read was The Peasant Queen. I think it's independently published on Kindle Publishing Direct, Kindle Direct Publishing, I think it was. This is a Christian fiction, a biblical retelling, basically, about Queen Esther. It was okay. The king that the character that Esther is based off of marries was not likable. I know he probably wouldn't have been in the book of Esther either, so maybe they were sticking with that. But you have to believe that the woman falls in love with him, because that's what the story is. This book in particular is about, and I just didn't find it believable that she would have fallen in love with him, because quite frankly, he's a bit of a jerk most of the time. But it's been on my TBR read for a while. I don't think I'll probably read any of the other books in this series. I think there's been another one. The character of I can't remember her real name, but she's the character that Esther is based off of. She felt like a goody two-shoes too sometimes. It was hard to relate to her because she's like too perfect. Horrible things happen to her, and she's just kind and perfect and forgiving, and it's like we don't really see any kind of conflict in her. So it was hard to get on board with that. Hearts on Fire. This was I read it on ebook. It's the third in a series. There's another fourth book, but it follows a different couple. This is based on Greek mythology, and a woman finds out that it's basically a chosen one trope. The woman finds out that she's going to reunite these four kingdoms, and the gods are helping her to do it, and she of course falls in love. The couple in the story I actually really like. I thought they had really great chemistry, and I enjoyed reading their scenes together and their interactions. The story itself was okay. It just kind of felt like a vehicle for the romance, which, if you're looking for romance, that can be a good thing. I enjoyed the story, and I enjoyed the book itself and the writing. The only thing that was a little bit annoying was the main character. It's told in the first person, so you hear her internal dialogue. And whether you're hearing her thoughts or it's what she's actually saying, so much of what she says feels like a sarcastic teen. And I've been this teen before. But if you've ever been in this period yourself or been with a teen who is like this, you cannot give a straight answer no matter what. Everything is answered with a sarcastic comeback. That's how she felt from time to time. But it did have a happy ending, and the heroes achieved their goal. And like I said, the romance was really good. The next one was technically another read, because I read this for fun when I was in college, Clan of the Cave Bear. And to be perfectly honest, this book was terrible. This book probably never should have been written. There is so much about this book that is problematic. It was another one that I really probably should have DNF'd it, and I don't know why I didn't. I could do a whole book about what was wrong with this. And beyond just the issues with it, it wasn't a good story. The it's a historical fiction, and it's one of the only historical fictions that I've heard of that takes place in prehistoric times, which I would love to read a good historic fiction. So if you know any, definitely tell me in the comments. But this one was not it. So the author did a lot of research to prepare for this book, and I got the feeling she did not want any of that research to go to waste. If you want a book that will teach you how to work leather and how to slaughter and butcher a woolly mammoth, this might be the book for you. But if you're not interested in those things, you have no use for those things, which I don't know why you would, skip this one. The next one was Big Feelings. This book was good, but it wasn't anything special. It's basically a work between two authors. They co-wrote it, talking about different emotions and how to deal with those emotions. And the information that they had was really good. I agreed with probably everything that I read in it. And you could tell a lot of research went into the book. So for that, I would probably give it a 4 stars. And I had no issues with this book. I thought it was a good read. I don't know that I'd say anything in it was groundbreaking or anything. Anger's not a bad thing. Learn to work through your anger. Don't suppress it. Yeah, I agree. I don't know who wouldn't. This was another one I got on ebook from my library. It's a good book, especially if you need to know like how to talk about emotions. Maybe you work with people a lot and you need to know like how to deal with your own emotions or how to teach others how to. That can be a really helpful book to put these things into words. And then my last book was another nonfiction called War on Peace. This is another one I have with me. The End of Diplomacy and the Decline of American Influence by Ronan Farrow. I think this might be my favorite book that I've read this month. It's basically about how we no longer in America look for the diplomatic resolution when working with other countries. We've become over-militarized, basically. And the author, who worked for, I think, 4 years at the State Department, explains sort of how that's happened. So it covers mostly the last 20 to 30 years, I'd say, of American history. Really good book, really well written. Like I said, I think this is my favorite one this month, which is better than what it sounds. I know I read some ones that I didn't feel strongly about, or I felt strongly in the wrong direction, but this is really a standout. So I would definitely recommend you read this one, especially if you're interested in things like politics or international relations, or even just recent history. I think that's a really good thing to know more about. So I would be interested to know if anyone has read any of the books that I read this month, and if you did, what did you think about them? Do you agree with what I've said, or not? Do you think the books that I hated were your favorites? I'd love to hear what you think about my list. Also, post if you know of any recommendations that you think I would enjoy. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me what your favorite book that you've read during the month of November was. All right, everyone. You have a great day.